Let's talk about books. These are the books I read in the first half of February, or my estimate of the first half of the books that I will have read by the end of February. So I just picked 5, and we'll see how many are in the next video. Okay. The first book that I finished is Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout, and really, really strong writing, like MFA fiction writing, like every detail so well selected, every sentence building its spot in the paragraph, leading to the perfect characterizations, revealing things about the characters at certain times, moving you through time really interestingly, which is just it takes so much work to do that. That's one of the things that makes this a craft, and that book did it so well. I had read 2 other books by Elizabeth Strout, and this is a funny, so many of hers are in the same universe, maybe most of them, and so Liz's mom had gotten this for Casey. Casey read it and loved it, and then looked it up and was like, this is the second book in this series. Weird. Then she read the first one and liked it, and she's read them all. She gave me a gift, I think for my birthday. It was like a Casey's book club. So every month she would send me a book that she thought I would like, which was so fun. And she did like a little Canva graphic for it, which of course was so special. And so she decided to remedy that problem by sending me, when she sent me my Elizabeth Strout book, the first one, which is called My Name is Lucy Barton. And then I read it and I was like, okay, that was okay. Enough to read the second one. I got the second one and read it, and I was like, oh my goodness, this was so good. I was like, oh, I think Liz's mom was onto something. Like, just send the really good book. And it's not like, I think when you think about reading something out of order in a series, you feel like there's going to be spoilers. But like I was saying with romances, where it's not a spoiler because you know every pair of people will end up together, in really character-driven fiction, it's preferable still always to read them, almost always, to read them in order, but you don't have to. You're not going to get a plot type of spoiler because it's more about the characters. I don't know if that's quite right, but anyway, I thought Anything Was Possible was pretty fantastic, and it's set in Iowa, if I remember. This one was so much better, so much more interesting than the first one, I guess I meant. Some of my favorite moments were watching the characters think in their heads and then decide which of their thoughts to share with the people in their lives. I read it in less than a day. It's not one of my favorites, but it was totally enjoyable. I wish every not my favorites book I read was this good. That's funny. Ooh, hot take. I think this is the book, and she should have scrapped My Name is Lucy Barton. Most people would disagree with that, which is fine. So anyway, there's these set of books, the Lucy set, mostly set in Iowa, I think, and Chicago a little bit. And then there's the Olive Kitteridge set, which is set in Maine. So there's Olive Kitteridge, Olive again, maybe another one. And then big book news last year, Tell Me Everything came out, which was when our 2 sets of characters collided and met and whatever. And that's what you need to know about Elizabeth Strout. So I don't know if I'm just talking so much because like there's only 5 books, we can say so much, but probably I always talk this much. So no way to say it. I had wanted to read this. It landed on the New York Times list, 100 best books of the century, that I have kind of been plucking books off of as I want something that feels like it has a little bit of staying power, something that I am confident the writing's going to be good whether or not I like the book, or something that I just want to have read, something that other people have been telling me about for a while, that kind of thing. So I did not I disliked the 2025 year-end New York Times list. Completely scorn it. But the best books of the century list was voted on by like 500 readers, and they all set their top 10, and then they compiled it based on that, and it's been fun. So this was brought back to my attention from that, and it was pretty great. This is the story of Olive, as you can tell from the title, but also the story of a bunch of different people in her community. So interestingly, the first story or chapter opens up and it tells it's from her husband's perspective. And you honestly barely see her at all. And she's quite the grouch when you do. He's a pharmacist at this small pharmacy in town. And then the next chapter, I think, is this boy who comes back to this small town in Maine, and he's in a crisis, and he parks to look out at the sea, and he's watching what's happening, and then Olive walks by and she gets in his car. She's a middle school math teacher, I think, and taught him years and years ago. And she's like, hey. And they talk, and the book is a series of little chapters like that of the people going around the town and doing things and running into each other. And it can be really fun to read something like that when every detail is really well controlled for you. And so that was great. Let me see. Okay. Do I read the whole thing or what? The way this bounced timelines and point of views was so cool. Masterful, really. It also was one of those books with detail so specific and dialogue so arresting, you notice it. You're engrossed in the book, and then there's a turn of phrase so sharp you step back and say, wow. So I feel like there's this spectrum of reading where when you're reading something that's really messy, first draft energy, but it published, you notice you're reading a book because the writing is not succeeding. And then there's this section of books where you don't notice you're reading. These are like really good books. And you're so engrossed in the book that you don't feel like you're reading a book. And that's, I mean, I maybe should put it over here because it's a really small group, and that can be like different books do that for different people. And then there's moments over here in the very end where books you're so engrossed in give you like one detail or turn of phrase that just delights you. And you're like, I am a reader. You are totally brought back into the fact that you're reading a book, and you're like, and this is why I read. Like, this is so cool. I remember still a turn of phrase from Saturday night at the Lakeside Supper Club. And you'd have to know the characters, but there's this line where it's like your character hugs this older woman who's kind of, I don't know, lonely or something. Or maybe it's like an aunt, like a family member who's been, anyway, hugging her was like hugging an anxious postcard rack, which is such a good line. And also not something you would ever really say, but like, you know exactly what that means. And you know what it feels like to hug someone who's like all elbows, and you're like, they're like smaller than you, and they're like, and so I love when that happens in books. That's the whole point. And there were some moments like that in this where I was like, you're so good. Like this. So let me read this one. Olive has a son. He's now an adult son who lives in somewhere far away, I don't remember. And she also has one friend that she'll sometimes call who lives in Maine with her. And I think that's all you need to know. Oh, her relationship with her son is pretty rocky. They have a really hard time communicating. So she goes on this, I think it's a date, and this guy tells her something about himself. And he's an older guy, and Bunny is her friend, and Bunny is older. She called Bunny to tell him this thing about the guy. And Bunny, Olive couldn't believe this, actually laughed. Oh, Olive, she said, does it really matter? And then Olive says, of course, and Bunny says, well, yeah, but the world has always been a mess. I think if you enjoy his company, you should just let it go. I don't, because it's like a politics. It's a thing about his politics that bothers Olive. I don't enjoy his company, Olive said and hung up. She never realized Bunny was an idiot, but there you were. Which is so good. And I hear old people talk like that sometimes, and also people of all ages, because old people are just people. And I think that's such a funny line, because she's been best friends with this lady like this whole time. And also, Olive is an idiot too. Like, you see her do these things and think these things, but like, that's what it is to be a human, is you're used to your idiosyncrasies and you often judge the ones of other people, or you just want someone to react how you want them to react when you tell them a story, especially when it's like one of your closest friends, and when they get it wrong, you're like, I actually don't even know why I like this person. So then she's like, oh, I'm all sad, because it was terrible though when you couldn't tell people things. Olive felt this keenly as the days went by, because she's not calling her best friend anymore. She called Christopher, her son. And then she tells him, and Christopher's like, well, gross. I thought you were calling to see how your grandson is. Of course I wonder how he is. I wish you'd called me to tell me how he is. When and how exactly this rupture with her son had taken place, Olive couldn't have said. I do call you, Mom. A long pause. But what? Well, it's a little hard to converse with you. I see. Everything is my fault. No, everything is someone else's fault. That's my point. It had to be her son's therapist who was responsible for all this. Who would ever have expected this? She said into the phone. Not I, said the little red hen. What? She hung up. That's like a nursery rhyme line. I swear Nana has said that to me before. Or someone in my life. When I read that, I was like, that is so good. Everything is someone else's fault, Mom. Not I, said the little red hen. She hangs up. So that was delightful. My biggest issue was actually in the first section. It was super fat phobic, and I have kind of like I'm always going to notice that. And I can't, like, sometimes it'll just be one thing. Like in Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld, there's this like one analogy of the house, and it was pretty problematic, and then it kind of moved on from there. Like, it moved on. It wasn't camping out in this problematic perspective on actual human people. So in the first chapter of this one, it happened over and over and over. It's like, oh my gosh, this is bad. Like, this is so noticeable. And okay, so we talked about this with the great Jilly Hawkins, I think, where it's like, in fiction, the question is the author being, what's the word that's stronger than biased? I can't think of it. Against fat people, or is the character? In this one, both, which is not what you want, right? You can have a character. Anyway. Okay, this is nonfiction book by Aubrey Gordon. She is one of the hosts of Maintenance Phase, a podcast that breaks down wellness myths by actually looking up the studies and walking you through the methodology and doing piles of research about whatever this thing is that people are yelling about these days. It is so satisfying to listen to. I love it so much. And that's who Aubrey Gordon is. Big fan. This was her second book. It's the one that I have. And it's called You Just Need to Lose Weight and 19 Other Myths About Fat People. So this is something I'm going to read from it and then collect it all up. Fat is a neutral descriptor for predominantly plus-size people. While fat is frequently used to insult people of all sizes, many fat people reclaim the term as an objective adjective to describe our bodies, like tall or short. It is used accordingly in a matter-of-fact way throughout the pages ahead. So she's setting you up for the book. Fat stands in contrast to an endless parade of euphemisms: fluffy, curvy, big girl, big bone, blah, 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 list, all of which just serve as a reminder of how terrified so many thin people are to see fat bodies, name them, or have them. Fat hasn't become a bad word because fatness is somehow inherently undesirable, but it has become a bad word because of what we attach to it. We take fat to mean unlovable, unwanted, unattractive, unintelligent, and unhealthy. But fatness is simply one aspect of our bodies and a very small part of who each of us is. It deserves to be described as a simple fact, bearing little relevance to our worth or worthiness, but a great deal of relevance to how we're treated by individuals and institutions. Which is such a great, succinct write-up of the way that the word fat is being reclaimed by the fat community. And it's one that you have to be careful with because it hasn't reached, not salience, solubility yet. Like, conversationally, I don't use that word neutrally because I don't use that word because it's often not perceived to be used neutrally. But whenever I'm talking about literature, for example, and actually talking about these ideas, it can be good to do. And so, yeah, I think you have to look to whatever the people in your life are or not comfortable with. And also, I think it's part of a responsibility when we live in a world that's so fatphobic to care about and read about and know about that form of bias, just like all the other forms of bias. So my favorite book on that is Fat Talk. It says it's a parenting book. It's just a perfect book. And then I've showed you Unshrinking before, and then the Aubrey Gordon one. That was a perfect little write-up of that. Hunger by Roxane Gay is a really good one too. But anyway. So, in this first section, there's just all of these lines that are pointing out that this one character is fat, and then the way the story goes, it doesn't pull it off. This is me not spoiling. Interesting. Okay, so that's not great. Like, I would have pointed that out in a workshop and been like, you can characterize this person with different adjectives to explain that you think they are this way, or you can see that this is how humans are and not be biased against them. I'm so bothered that I can't think of the word. It's like the verb form of slur. Anyway, make a better choice, Elizabeth Strout. Interestingly then, later in the book, a character is getting breakfast with another character or something, and she says, She says, same with my smoking. I've been putting off the first cigarette of the day and I've got it pushed back now, 3 p.m. That's great, Daisy, he said. He had seen that she'd not been smoking on Sunday mornings, but wasn't going to mention it. The appetites of the body were private battles. I read that and I was like, Elizabeth, if you know this here, how do you not know this in a more global sense? And one of your characters is aware of this, but you, when you're writing the book, are not. As I paused when I started to read that, it's because earlier they're talking about losing weight, like right before the smoking line. And so then I'm like, oh, maybe actually this is just as like that's kind of almost becomes like a throwaway line at that point. And I think regardless, it gets to a point which is that like health is private and bodies are private, and we should respect. Like a lot of fat activists talk about how like people say they're worried about people who are fat because of their health, and they're like, yeah, but no, you don't have to actually worry about other people's health who are strangers to you. And also, stigma does not increase health. It actually decreases it, which there's a great section on in Unshrinking. So, I talk about this for a long time. Olive Kitteridge, pretty good book. But if you're going to give me that, I'm going to spend a lot of time in your book talking about that problem with it. So, it was pretty charming. Is there anything else I need to say? I love books that focus on the humanity of people who are not between the ages of 20 and 30. Like, I like old people, and I love books about old people, and yeah, that was a great piece of work. Not I, said the little red. The next book I finished is Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray. This is a historical fiction book set during the Harlem Renaissance in Harlem, and it opens with Jessie Fawcett, the main character, moving to Harlem and being welcomed to her apartment by W.E.B. Du Bois. So she is his mistress, and she was in real life. And with fiction, you want an arc, which we've talked about. And the first time I remember learning this was in high school, I think, yeah, when we read the Iliad. and we read significant enough portions of it that, I'm sorry, I'm so distracted by the fact that, like, I got this book in high school. It was one of those we got to keep. And so I wrote the first line, like, in artsy cursive on the back, which is funny. And, like, you know, this has been through a lot. Anyway, and the person who put it through a lot is approaching this specifically. Looked delicious. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. So the first line of the Iliad is Rage Goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. And then Teddy took a Sharpie and wrote, okay, la la la, rar. And with that, I don't even remember what I was saying. This is about the war, the Trojan War, and Achilles is the main character, and then the book ends and the war is still going on. And when I was in 9th grade, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why does the book not tell the whole story? And whoever my teacher was said, the story is, she's been so quiet and lying down all morning. I also feel like if I let her get, that she would be really quiet, but I can't do this. Okay, I'm just gonna close my eyes and speak. This is not the story of the Trojan War. This is the story of Achilles and his character transformation. And so that's why the book ends before the war ends, because the story of Achilles is complete. Okay, so the point of most fiction is character transformation. And often when a book isn't giving you what you want by the time you finish it, it's because the arc of transformation was not built with enough scaffolding, or it wasn't finished, or the author didn't keep an eye on it constantly enough. So in Harlem Rhapsody, that was the issue. It didn't feel like you were reading Jessie's story as she transformed in an arc. It felt like cycles. So there were 3 that I can remember points in the book. So she's in love with W.B. Du Bois, but she doesn't want to get married, and he is married and says that she's his most special person and his wife can't give him what he needs, or like whatever. So she at the beginning is trying to justify this, like, I think this could work, and through the whole book is trying to justify it. And there's 3 points where they get in a fight, or he's disrespectful to her, or whatever, 3 points of contention. And then after those points, she'll say, oh my gosh, am I gonna leave him? I think I'm gonna leave him. And then she just doesn't. And so then you get to the next one, same thing, the next one. And it's not until like 350 pages in where you watch Dakota, get down. Get down. Hi. We've tried this before, it doesn't work. I also have to go to work in like not too long. Can you tell me what time it is? I bet if I had let her lie on the couch, she would have been quiet. Okay, so in this story, the character who you're supposed to be watching transform does not transform on a timeline that works for the book that you were given. I realized that and started skimming, and yeah, I started skimming around page 180. Good girl. And didn't feel like that was... I really give a book like a pretty significant chunk of time before I'll either quit or start skimming. I usually am pretty confident by the time I decide to do that that makes sense. And I did skim all the way to the end of this one and was not mad that I had skimmed. Because, well, two other big issues with this book. One, it suffered from the history is so cool and I know all this cool stuff and I think it's so cool that I'm gonna tell you about all of it. If that makes sense. Like, oh my god, Dakota's stuck in the curtain. I wish you could see it. It's so funny. Okay. I mean, she's not stuck. It's just like resting on her head, but she wants it to be behind her so she can see out the window. Okay, Jessie Fawcett, as the real woman, was an editor at the Crisis, and she mentored younger poets who then became these poets who are incredibly famous today. I think that is amazing and cool. I think the author thinks that's amazing and cool and was not able to keep a handle on containing that enough for the book to hold it. It felt like it was slipping through her fingers. And one of the things that I noticed, whether this is something that, how do you say that? Like, I noticed that there were so many scenes. Every 3 pages, you're switching scenes. She's now at the office mentoring a young writer. Then she's home. Then she's on a date with W.B. Du Bois. Then she's back at the office mentoring another writer. Then she's walking down the streets of New York City. Then she's meeting with her mom. Then she's back at the office. Then she's with W.B. Du Bois. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if in this 370-page book, the average scene is like 4 pages long, which means you would switch scenes like 70-something times, or that could be totally, I didn't really do that math in my head. So that is something where you can see how when you write each of these scenes, you feel like you're taking your book somewhere, but actually the brevity of each of them keeps you from drawing the reader's attention and the attention of your writing and your words to what is important, which is, how is Jessie in this moment, and what is happening in this scene transforming her. So that's my main take on this. I think I am in the minority in terms of a lot of people who like historical fiction really like this book. I also think sometimes when you want more from a book, it's because there's so much there. Like, it could have been amazing. So overall it didn't work for me. I didn't tag anything specifically. I will say, if you need a book with a really cool Langston Hughes cameo, I would go Our Secret Society. And it's even cooler in this one because this is a biography. This is nonfiction. And this is, to this day, kind of the top of the line example for me of having a story that you as the author think is so cool, and then writing it well. Not just researching it and thinking it's cool and then kind of megaphoning like, this is so cool, but like then using your craft to share the information with the reader in a way that makes them say, this is so cool. And that's really hard to do. It's really special. This one is about Molly Moon. She was kind of the fundraiser behind the civil rights movement. So this is Molly Moon and the glamour, money, and power behind the civil rights movement. She lived in Harlem. I've talked about this book so many times. So Langston Hughes, third from the left in the top or something. He's one of the people in this photo from when Molly Moon had either it was when she went to Germany or Russia, but this book didn't quite do it. We also have another Langston Hughes book coming down the line, because for February, I think I started this tradition last year, but once it turns February 1st, whenever I pick the next books that I'm reading from, like, my TBR is sometimes I'll write a book down if I want to read it. There's books like in my head that I know that I want to read, and then once I buy a book, it's like way higher because it's actually here. So when I need a book to read, I'm gonna go grab it. So for Black History Month, I start with only taking off and reading the books of Black authors to kind of celebrate that month. And it also helps me prioritize books that I've purchased. And anyway, what was I saying? Oh, I needed more fiction, and I want to try to read more middle grade. Like, I was thinking it would be cool to actually read an early reader, a middle grade book once a month. So I picked this one up, Finding Langston, Lisa Klein writes, and we're not gonna talk about it because it's for later in the month. But more Langston Hughes coming. And then after I read Harlem Rhapsody, I was curious about whether I had, please hold, Langston Hughes in my anthology. Guys, this shelf's gonna flip if I don't put the heavy books back on it. This could become more interesting than we bargained for. Of course not. I would not let such a thing happen to my books. Okay, this is my American lit anthology, which this is the kind of thing you get when you're an English major and they're trying to help you. Oh, this is so cool. They're trying to help you not have to buy 100 different books. And so they print all of them together. This is hilariously large, and that's totally fine. I feel like I passed. Oh, here's Zora Neale Hurston. Oh, Eudora Welty. Guys. Oh, I found him. I wanted to see if I could find him by just flipping to know where. Oh, and okay. To know where in American history he was. This is the section called American Literature from 1914 to 1945. Not interesting. After Ernest Hemingway comes Langston Hughes with a set of poems, and then there's one thing by John Steinbeck, and then County Colin and Richard Wright. And County Colin is another poet that she mentors in this book who wrote for The Crisis, and I didn't know about him, so that was cool to learn. 2, 2, 2, 1. 2, 2, 2. Here's Richard Wright. Okay, so we're almost here. 1. Oh, good. Notes. So Langston Hughes was assigned to me in college. And some of these poems are printed in this book. Maybe I should come back to them. But guess what? I read Finding Langston, and see, now I'm like, I'm not going to spoil it, and then I spoil. I thought that the way that she included his poems in this middle grade, early reader, actually, book was so cool and readable. So we will come back to him later. The next book I read is The Hitch by Sarah Levine. The Hitch is the story of a woman who is, actually, I'm going to read you my thingy. A week watching her 6-year-old nephew opens Rose's world in unexpected, not always straightforward ways. She is overbearing and selfish and lonely, and it took me a minute at the beginning to realize that. It took her more than a minute to realize it, and even by the end, her transformation leaves some wisdom and likability to be desired. This woman lives in Evanston. She is single and in her 40s or 50s. She founded a yogurt business that became incredibly popular, which she is trying to sell because now she is emphatically vegan and believes dairy is bad. And yet she is able to afford this incredible home and all of these incredible interior design pieces because of the business that she started. Her brother, who she kind of raised, has a son who she really adores. And at the beginning, you find out that every Saturday she gets him from 10 to noon, and that's it. And then his parents, her brother and his wife, are going to Mexico, and she weasels her way in and begs to be able to watch him for that week. And that's the week that this book covers. The writing was craft, so well written. The plot was wild but earned, and the ending worked, which it so easily could have just not. Because okay, yes, I'm gonna tell you the little conceit that everyone knows when they start the book. Am I? If you don't want to hear it, what I will say is this is a comic novel. It may or may not be your sense of humor, but it is so sharply and so well written that it's a great read. Either way, it's a very quick read. And if you want something weird and funny and easy but not dumb, then this could be a good read. Then now, if you don't want to know anything else about why there's a dog on the cover or anything, you can switch to the next book. Our main character has a dog. When she and her nephew go to the dog park, like day one of Mexico week, her dog snaps the neck of a corgi who's on a retractable leash. There's really interestingly interesting dog people dynamics. She starts telling you this. I told you she's kind of she's a lot to handle by talking about the evils of retractable leashes and how no one should use them. And then the corgi dies and its soul jumps into her nephew, her 8-year-old nephew, who she's taking care of. And this is what happens in the book. Like this, it goes from there. And it goes from there. And the plot was earned. Like I was saying, the ending, I could not figure out how she was going to end this book, because how do you end that? You know what I mean? Like, the parents come back at the end of the week. What are you going to do? And I thought it worked. And that's really exciting. I don't like when you get to the end of a book and then it doesn't land the plane. It's been so good up until then. There's a couple scenes that were just so remarkable. And like the details in this were so strong, and it was good. It is a Roxane Gay book. So she has an imprint at Grove Atlantic, which means, so most of the publishers, there's like they usually call it Big Five. There's a couple other big-ish ones, and they have acquired most of the publishing houses. There used to be more diversity, or like more different ones. So now Penguin Random House is one publisher. Used to, it was Penguin and Random House, but then they merged. So within publishing houses, there are imprints, which are smaller groups of editors, say, who acquire books and publish them. And those imprints kind of have like a specific thing that they go for, or a type of book that they usually share. And so sometimes when a writer is interested in also editing and talented enough and connected enough to make that happen, they will have a imprint. So they start editing and publishing books. And interestingly, the role of an editor is not just someone who fixes commas. You shepherd the book through the entire process. You oversee the development of the whole structure and everything. And you also are in charge of getting the book to the right people and working with marketing and working with bookstores, or however you think this book can find the readers that it's meant to find. That's also the job of reps. So representatives for publishing houses are someone who goes between the publishing house and bookstores or whatever to get books out. But it is also the job of an editor to only acquire a book that you think you can sell and get into the world. So anyway, Gillian Flynn is the author of Gone Girl. By the way, that's how you say her name. I went to a book event where she was last week, and now we know it's not Jillian, it's Gillian. Everyone gets it wrong though. No longer on this do we get it wrong. Gillian has an imprint, and this is one of the books that she published that we talked about last summer. Roxane Gay now has an imprint at Grove Atlantic, and I read Frighten the Horses because it was published by her, and this one was a memoir. Then I picked The Hitch for book club in March, and it's gonna be a really fun time. So Sarah Levine is actually a local Chicago author. She is gonna come to book club, which is gonna be super fun, and she works at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So The other book she wrote was Treasure Island with 3 exclamation points, which is, you know, you got to work to get even 1 exclamation point in a title. And Roxane Gay wrote about it in Bad Feminist. I actually don't remember where, but when Roxane got her imprint, she reached out to Sarah Levine and asked if she had any books coming online, and this was the one, and they did it, and we're grateful. The next book I read is A Time Traveler's History of Tomorrow by Kendall Culver. This is a on the border between middle grade and YA. I don't know what that sound is. It's like a helicopter. How loud is it to you? Well, probably not that loud. This is on the border between middle grade and YA. I would say it's YA, but very young leaning. I think some YA is like very older kid leaning, and this one is not. So I feel like the line of that is like, if the characters are kissing and that's it, then it's like young YA and like maybe just one kiss kind of thing. So it's set, this is Genevieve, this is Ash, and it starts in 1939. Okay, this is so cool actually. So the Chicago as a city has hosted 2 World's Fairs. The first one was incredibly famous, kind of the main one you hear about, and that's the one that Devil in the White City is set at, and that was in 1893, I think. Yes, helpful of him to put that on the back. And then we hosted the Columbian Exposition, which was another World's Fair, in 1939. So this opens at the Columbian Exposition. Genevieve is a scientist. She wants to present a cyclotron because she is a physicist. She's also 16. And she applied for this fellowship and she got it. She sent her research. They're super excited for her to announce this. She discovered a new element on the periodic table, like this girl. And that's the problem, is that she's a girl. And so she decides that she just needs to show up right before it's time to speak, and then they'll have to let her on the stage. And she's looking for her place in the world, and her sisters are going to law school and they're good at other things, and she feels invisible. She feels so invisible that she turns invisible sometimes. And so she's gonna use this to her advantage. Scene, same place, same time. Ash grew up in a cult in rural Pennsylvania, and the cult leader has successfully predicted all of these tragic world events and says the end of the world is going to happen at the Chicago World's Fair in 1939. Ash somehow has the ability to turn back time. So he goes to the Chicago World's Fair to try to save the world. And when he finds out there's a nuclear cyclotron being presented, he thinks that might end the world. Is that enough setup? I think so. So anyway, you have these 2 really cool characters. I liked both of them, and I thought they were so fun to follow, and they get thrown together by fate and the things that are happening. And this is not a spoiler, it's in the title. They travel in time. They travel back in time on accident because he can time travel little hops, but once he does it very dramatically. And guess where they land? So it was cool. It was fun. It didn't super stick with me. It's a little bit lessons in chemistry in how it glances over the difficulty of being a woman in science, pre-ever. Especially in 1890s. You meet a really cool Black female scientist there, and then also obviously it's hard for her in 1939, and still it really balances, which you want in kind of a commercial read like this, balances the plot and the character transformation, and they work together to get you where you're going. So I had a lot of fun reading it. If you think that sounds cool, you might too. And then I read My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. This is a nonfiction book that is in the trauma healing sector of books. So I could talk about these for a long time. Let's see. Yeah, we'll talk about kind of its placement in at least my understanding of this tradition of writing. And then we can talk about the book specifically. So the most famous book like this is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that book has helped a lot of people. And its author is not, that's not like a book that I shoot to sell. Usually I'll sell Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman, I think her name is. And someone told me that Bessel van der Kolk took a lot of his research like from her book, which matters. And also there are some other iffy things about his book. There are iffy things about him. And if you want to read the drama, Mother Jones, the magazine, but it's like online, had a writer like report the story. So if you just Google Mother Jones, Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, you can read that. It's a wild time. And anyway, I don't have The Body Keeps the Score. I would love to read Trauma and Recovery. I just haven't gotten around to that one. There are a couple other sort of founding texts of that kind of writing, and this actually is one of them. It is kind of a seminal work in this space. And let me see when it came out. 2017. Yeah. Resmaa Menakem is a Black man who lives in Minneapolis, and he does a lot of, from what I remember, like workshop type stuff. So he's worked with the police department. He works as a healer, I think as a therapist as well. And yeah, has done a lot of work in this space over the course of his career. There was a lot of useful things in this book. One of the things that stood out to me as being really helpful and not something that I had seen many other places was the focus on the physical body. And that's something that is in The Body Keeps the Score, you can tell from the title, but also is addressed in a way that is really interesting and powerful here. The closest thing that I don't want to get up. This pink book, Fear, Self-Compassion, was one of the first times that I had kind of encountered that, and I think he does it really well here. And he talks about not just individual ways to move and to feel hard things in your body, or not just noticing what your body is doing in certain environments, but also collective things. He has this idea about when you're in a group and like having everyone hum for 15 seconds and then starting like whatever you were going to do, which is like weird sounding, but also sounds really cool to me. Like to have people, I'm really interested in like posture and the ways that our bodies can communicate, and the ways that we do that on accident a lot, but the ways that we can do it on purpose even better. So the thing that didn't work for me about this book, you can probably tell from my hedging that it wasn't like a slam dunk, is it's written in second person. So like you might feel blah, blah, blah. And it's pretty self-helpy. I think it almost would have been, it's almost like you should think of this, if you're getting it, as like a workbook more than a piece of nonfiction. In that, I'm gonna read from the back and then we'll go. Turns out self-help books written in second person are not my thing, even when I'm interested in the topic. This was 3 books in one. So we talked about that with Can You Hear Me Now, where it was 2 different books printed in one piece of binding. And it, I think, worked there. Here, I get, like, usually when someone, so the three books in one would be Dear White People, Dear Black People, Dear Cops. Those are the three people he's talking to and talking through things. And I say something about that in a second. Part cool, part needing more citations, like It Didn't Start With You, which is this one. I think this book is a must read for anyone who's going to be adopting or fostering. It also really helped shape my belief in the importance of telling stories and telling your family stories as like something really important and worth doing. It also, though, is kind of woo-woo and is one of those books that's like not super, like when he says stuff and there's not the science behind it, he'll be like, we actually don't have the science for this yet. I've noticed this qualitatively in my research, but I cannot give you studies, which is important for someone to be that straight up when they're talking about science. Like you see the DNA on the cover. And this book also had no citations, which drove me a little bit crazy. I don't think it was trying to be that kind of book, but also it kind of was. Like there would just be these sentences that I think you need to cite behind, and it there's no bibliography, there's no notes section here. The author needed to pick an audience. He instead wrote to everyone. And reading, if you're white, read this section, or if you're a cop, this is for you, takes up time and can lose the reader. I can tell this author speaks for a living by the chatty tone. I actually don't think it was poorly organized. It was the issues with POV and audience and tone that made it obnoxious. I appreciate the focus on the physical body. I already said that. Talking about racialized trauma is so important. Like this here flesh, I think I'd like a speech by or conversation with the author more than the book, which is this one that I talked about and didn't even finish skimming. So, audience is the biggest thing and in this book. And I get why it would be really hard to switch gears into a book when you're used to speaking to literal audiences of people. Because if you are Resma and you have an appointment at the Minneapolis Police Department for a workshop, then you are doing almost exactly what's in here. I'm sure he pulled so much of this from his week and things like that. And you know who the audience is. I also get that these ideas are all so connected that you don't really see a way to not write to three audiences at once. And obviously there is some overlap between those three groups of people, which is also interesting. The other reason it reads like a workbook is because there's these huge sections where you're supposed to body practices. And I really went into this intentionally. So the first couple, and he's coaching you through it. He's like, whenever you hit one of these sections, like you need to, hang on. You need to stop. Like, do not come back to this later. If you don't read on, wait until you're home if you can't do it, and do this. And the first one's like a breathing thing or something. And then there's one where you like welcome the ancestors. And then there's one where you put a piece of string around you. And I did try, find a quiet, comfortable place where you can be alone for a few minutes. Bring with you a piece of string or rope or yarn at least 10 to 12 feet long. And so I have this twine and I cut it because I was really like, I'll try this. And then I put it on the ground in a circle. You're supposed to like stand in the middle of the circle. And then because it had been in a spool for so long, it's like a 20-foot piece of string. And it made a circle like this big because it's like all coiled up. And I was like, that didn't quite go. And okay, so what do you need to know? I think this is a book worth existing. I don't think this is a book you should read straight through as if it is, like, you almost need to think of it as, like I said, a workbook or a podcast or something to either skim to figure out what sections are important to you, mark those, and you can come back to them when you need them, or keep on the shelf and go to when you're like, this is something I'm interested in right now, I want to think about right now, I need help processing something, and use it as a reference there. Now, there are 100 reasons why there might be 100 other ways to read this book. For me, that's what I would say. And I always talk about this, but just the importance when you choose a book as your medium of every sentence doing what it needs to do. And I don't have a fix in my head for this audience and tone issue. I don't think that, I think sometimes with books by people who are experts about one thing, it can be really important to get the book out and to assemble all of their knowledge into something discrete that you can carry. And they might be a book that's not the most excellent version of every sentence in its place kind of thing. I think there can still be value in books like that, and not only because everyone has different standards of what they want from a book, but also because it's possible to skim and like glean things from this. I also can imagine, and I think Teddy said this, like reading this in 2017 when it came out versus me reading it in 2025 when, 7 of these books talk about the same themes from the similar perspectives, would have been a really different experience. And so this is a really cool piece of work that I'm glad exists. Yeah, give me 1 second. And took some cool perspectives. Like he talks about trauma being passed down through the bodies of Black folks because of slavery. Yes. He also talks about the history of torture and medieval torture and stuff. The history of that in white bodies being passed down through European history and coming over to America. So you now know what you need to know about this. It was cool. Come here. Yeah, I'm done. We can go outside. Okay. Those are the books that are in the first half of February. Thank you for coming. If you want other books about, I feel like I pulled the comp titles for My Grandmother's Hands. But yeah, Trauma and Recovery. I'll get around to it one of these days. Also, Hunger by Roxane Gay is just a really fantastic book about the body. And it's a memoir and it's so readable and beautiful. Happy February. Happy Black History Month. I've got some more books coming down the line pretty soon that we'll read about, talk about in a week or two. Free. Let's go get your coat on. Go get your harness on. Yeah, I mean it.